All right, so we have finally come to our final section of the Linkage Institution unit. And today we're going to be looking at political participation. We're going to take a look at the political culture of the United States. We'll also kind of narrow in on voting and also the Electoral College and how that works. And we'll take a look at a recent presidential election as an illustration. So when we talk in terms about political culture, really what we're asking ourselves is how are citizens, private citizens, how are they playing their role in the system? How are they affiliating with government? That's really what this whole unit of linkage institutions is all about. We all have a role to play in a democracy. And so when we ask about the culture of politics, we're asking how do we feel about our political system? How do we feel about our politicians, about our institutions? And that kind of is illustrated by the way we participate. So when we talk in terms of conventional participation, these are kind of the safe things that people tend to do in the biggest numbers. And so obviously voting is one of these things, but people can also run for office, which is probably not an everyday thing. That's kind of a bigger thing, but plenty of people do that. We can petition, we can donate money. In fact, that's on the rise. When people, we've had times in American history where we had 90-something% turnout, and in recent years we've been in the 50s or up around 60% turnout. But donating is on the rise. That's what the web has done for us. And so, in an age where a lot of people are distracted by, there's so many things that take up our time nowadays, we're increasingly even too lazy to go and vote. And so, you don't even have to get out of your pajamas, and you can sit in front of your computer and make a donation and feel good about yourself. So, when you have a system of political culture that is relatively healthy, you're going to see people mostly participating in these things. When you have a political culture that is kind of on the rocks or that is kind of bubbling a little bit, you're going to see some more extreme forms of participation, what we might call unconventional participation. So those would include things like protests or boycotts or picketing or something that is calling for some kind of change. And if that doesn't do it, you can resort to even more severe actions where you actually break the law to make a political point. We call this civil disobedience. And so now you're talking about rioting, sabotage, vandalism, all the way up to the most extreme thing, which would be assassination or terrorism to make a political point. And so in all of these, the goal is to have, just like with every other linkage institution, have a voice, but your voice is meaningless unless it's heard. And so there's a close connection with political participation and the media, who sets the agenda on a nationwide scale for national politics, and getting the attention of these policymakers, and you kind of gauge how things are in the political culture based on how extreme the measures get. So now we're going to zoom in on voting, and voter turnout is the first topic we need to look at. When we look at voting, the two spheres we need to concentrate on is who actually votes, and then from among those people, how do they vote. So with voter turnout, we make political activity legitimate. And again, this goes back to political culture. If your political culture is strong and people are going through the motions, playing their role in the system, then you've got an active, legitimate, strong, sense of your political system. And that's what elections do. They measure how stable we are as a society, and also it voices the political goals of the electorate. The people have a big role in modern government and politics. They can vote for lots of things. It's not like it used to be where we could only vote for the House of Representatives, our local congressmen, and then you could vote for whatever your state allowed you. That's if you had voting rights. But today that's been expanded. Now you can vote for your local congressman or woman. You can vote for your senators. You can vote for the president. You can vote for your governor and your state legislature and your mayor and your city council. There's lots of things that we can vote for. And this is a democracy. That's our main role, is voicing who we want our representation to be. We can also oversee the legislative process at the state level. So we don't have a national referendum in the United States. Some countries do, where the policymakers say, well, we're going to leave this question up to the people. So, for example, recently in the United Kingdom, they had a national referendum in Scotland to decide if they wanted to maintain their ties in the United Kingdom, and it was voted down, and so to this day they're still in the UK. We don't have this in the United States. We do have it at the state level, though. So whenever you see proposition this, proposition that, this is a statewide initiative or referendum, and California is famous for it. This is how we got something like the high-speed rail through, was through a California state initiative. Deciding whether to vote is an important question. All people who are over the age of 18 can vote, except for non-citizens, and even that's changing. Even that's being questioned. And in some states, criminals can't vote. In 2004, only 55% of adults voted. That number went up in 2008 and 2012 as a lot more people who don't typically vote came out and voted for Obama. He was able to really mobilize his base and get them out to turn out to vote. The main reason people don't vote is there's really no excuse, but I can tell you what they say. They say that it's an inconvenience to go down and vote because they can't get off of work or they can't get out of school. It's just a bunch of baloney, because you can go during your lunch break, you can go after school, you can go after work. The polls are usually open until 8. And by law, everybody gets a break and everybody gets a lunch if you're working full-time. And so that's not really an excuse. Some say we should have it on the weekend. A lot of states have their primaries on weekends in order to maximize voter turnout. But even that, that's fine. A lot of people just don't vote because they don't care. They're too lazy. They're more interested in other things. Because you don't even really have to go and vote. You don't have to leave the house. You can get an absentee ballot sent right to your house, and you can do it in your underwear if you wanted to. So there's really no excuse other than what voter turnout tells us is how strong our political culture is. If you have a strong political culture and there's some sense of urgency, then you're going to have higher numbers of turnout. If there is low political culture where people just don't care, then you're going to have pretty low turnout. And in American history, we've had both of these scenarios. The reason people turn out to vote is one of two things: either civic duty, where you believe that it's your role in the system to go out and vote, or you have some sort of sense of political efficacy, which is that you get that good feeling inside of you that you're making a difference, and by golly, you went out and did it. And I guess it kind of depends on who you are as to which of these you resonate with, or both, or something else. But it definitely does play a role in the political culture about how people feel about themselves when they go out and vote. Registering to vote is another factor of voter turnout. You just don't show up on election day at the polling station and cast your vote. You have to be registered to vote beforehand. And on the one hand, this is done with the intent of making sure that we don't have voter fraud, which as years go by, this becomes increasingly less so. We actually have seen a rise in voter fraud. But the other thing is it creates kind of an impediment to vote. It's one more hoop to jump through, one more excuse for people to not go out and vote. So the really lazy person is going to say, well, not only do I got to go out and vote, I got to go out and get registered also. Well, again, you can do this at home. You can do it on the web. You can do it when you renew your driver's license. That's been true since the Motor Voter Act went through in the early 90s. So again, it's just if you have a strong sense of political efficacy, or you have a sense of political civic duty, In a strong political culture, people will vote if they really want to vote. If not, then they got another excuse in the registration requirement. Who votes? Who turns out to vote is something that we can scientifically observe. People with more education are more likely to vote than those who are not educated. Older people tend to vote more than younger people do, either because they have a stronger sense of civil duty or political efficacy, or because they're just more informed and they're wiser and they have more issues pertaining to them. It could be lots of things. Uneducated minorities have a very low turnout rate, but educated minorities have a very high turnout rate. So sometimes it's not just one label. We have to kind of bring in multiple labels of how we identify people to get a more precise evaluation of who turns out. Women turn out to vote slightly more than men. Married people turn out slightly more than single people. And people in unions who tend to be political organizations are more likely to vote than non-union members. We can go on and create all kinds of designations about who votes. But those first couple of bullets are the ones that are pretty stark. The rest of them, you're going to see more or less slight differences. All right, now we turn to voting behavior. So once we've figured out who votes, who shows out to vote, now we ask the question, how do they vote? And so obviously we start with party identification. If you are a Republican, you're going to vote Republican. If you're a Democrat, you're going to vote Democrat 90-something% of the time. Party identification patterns are pretty similar to ideological patterns. In other words, if you're a liberal, you're going to vote Democrat. If you're a conservative, you're going to vote Republican. Although as time goes by, we're starting to see some separation between ideological voting and party affiliation, because people are becoming more and more dissatisfied with their political parties. And so now we're seeing a lot more people become independents. We're seeing more moderate voters, or new designations of voters who don't necessarily fit the two main ideological teams. And things shift over time, and depending on the situation, depending on what the issues are, where you are in life. So there's lots of things that can impact how you vote, and we'll take a little bit closer look at that in a moment. Less and less people, especially young people, are not voting along party lines. And this is kind of, we're in the final days of the party electorate, and that may have already happened. Political parties are alive and well as simply a badge that candidates wear to help voters understand what they stand for. So if you've got the big R on your chest as a Republican candidate, that's going to help mobilize people who typically vote Republican or maybe slant Republican. Same thing with Democratic candidates. However, there's less and less reason for people to register as Republicans or Democrats. In most cases, you can be an independent and you're entitled to all the same privileges as you were before. A lot of studies nowadays, ever since the beginning of TV, beginning with the election of 1960 and when JFK wins, seemingly because he was a better looking candidate and looked better in a suit than Richard Nixon did. Ever since then, elections have for the most part been more about personality and charisma than about the issues. And that may be a really simplistic way of looking at it, and that's definitely not always true. But there is something to be said for the role of image when it comes to how people vote. Very famous study that's been done a couple of times is called the American Voter Study. And this is what I like to point to when we ask the basic question, what do people base their vote on? In other words, I'm going to vote for person A or person B because of this reason. And it gives you a breakdown, and they've done this throughout various decades, and we tend to think that voters are becoming less informed, or voters are basing their vote on different things than they used to. And what this study reveals is that things have not really changed that much since the 1950s. So 1 out of 8 voters, or 12%, are ideologues. which means they strictly adhere to being a liberal or a conservative, or even a Republican or a Democrat, and they vote along those lines no matter what. So they don't shift with the political winds. They are born and bred to be Republicans or Democrats, and they vote based on those rules alone. 42% of voters are group benefit voters, and these are people who vote in such a way that it's best for them, not on the country on the whole. So it's kind of the mentality that I'm going to vote in a way that's going to be best for me, mainly economically. For example, if you're a union member, you're going to vote in a way that's best for your union, which means higher wages and better conditions for you, even if it's not good for everybody else. If it's good for you, you're going to vote that way. Nature of the Times voters is 1 out of 4 voters, and they basically base their vote on the quality of the Times. These are the people that are pretty limited on how informed they are on politics, but they know enough to know if times are good or times are bad. So that basically on election, they don't really pay attention to politics at all until election day, so to speak, and they put their head out the window and they say, okay, times are good, the economy's good, we're not in a big war, there's not a lot of social strife, and so therefore we're going to either re-elect the same person as president or keep the same party in power, or they're going to look out the window and see a bad economy or an unpopular conflict or riots in the streets, or their own wages have gone down or something like that, and they're going to say, oh, times are bad, we're going to vote the bums out and put somebody else in. And then you have the no-issue content voters, which is 1 out of 5 voters. And they have no idea what's going on. They have no urgency to figure out what's going on. They have a low sense of political culture, a low sense of political efficacy or civic duty, but they do have enough to actually show up to vote. But because they don't know anything about the issues or about what's happening, they basically base their vote on candidate personality. And I think a lot of people would expect this number to be higher, but it's only about 22%. And again, these designations are pretty broad, and it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. But it's pretty easy to see how a lot of people just turn on the TV and say, wow, that candidate sounds really good, or that candidate dresses really good, or that candidate's got a great smile. Oh, look, that candidate's on MTV or talking on the Tonight Show, and they're really funny, and I'm going to vote for them. And we got other things that we've talked about already, with things like the bandwagon effect and things like that will make people jump on the bandwagon for really bizarre reasons sometimes. So that's what the American Voter Study comes up with, and there's other similar studies that are going to give us slightly different numbers, but more or less this is the electorate in America and how they base their vote. All right, now I want to take a look at the Electoral College. So this is strictly pertaining to presidential elections, and here's how it works. Each state has the same number of electoral votes as they have members of Congress. So you basically take the number of members of the House of Representatives that you have in your state, plus the 2 senators, and that's the number you get. So for example, California has 53 congressmen and women. They have 2 senators, and therefore they have 55 electoral votes. And so the states with the most population have more electoral votes than the smaller state populations. All state competitions are winner take all. So it really what the presidential election is 50 mini presidential elections. It's state by state. So if a nominee wins the most votes in a state, what we call the popular vote, which is winning the most votes in a particular state, they get all of the state's electoral votes, with slight differences in Maine and Nebraska. So in California, if you win by 1 vote, 1 single vote from amongst the millions of ballots cast in California, you get all 55 of that state's electoral votes. You go to Wyoming and you lose by 1 vote, your opponent's going to get all 3 of the electoral votes. They're a small populated state, and so they only have 3 electoral votes. Okay? The magic number is 270 votes, electoral votes. So the first one to get to 270 wins the presidential election. 270 more or less is the most important number in election politics. Now, if we have more than 2 people in the election, or we wind up with a 269 to 269 tie, and nobody gets a majority, the Constitution prescribes that the House of Representatives gets to choose from among the top 3. But each state delegation gets 1 vote each. So it's not all 435 members of the House get a vote. No, each state gets 1 vote. So really, there would be 50 votes cast in this situation. This has only happened one time in 1824, which was the corrupt bargain election, when John Quincy Adams emerged over Andrew Jackson. And basically, the House of Representatives delivered the votes when Henry Clay, the Speaker, delivered them and was promised a Secretary of State job from John Quincy Adams. And that's why they called it the corrupt bargain. It hasn't happened since, and it really probably can't happen today. There could be a tie of 269 to 269, but a lack of majority probably won't happen because our system basically has made it so we will wind up with 2 candidates one way or another. So there actually are electors. The Electoral College has electors. They used to be important. They used to be people who were sent by each state legislature to go and cast the votes in the presidential election on behalf of the state legislature. Over time, we've become more democratic, and we, the voters, decide who we want the president to be. The electors still get together in December, a month after the election takes place in November, and they'll get together and cast their votes. However, it's just kind of a formality. They don't really get to have a say. Every now and then you'll get a rogue elector who will do what they want, but by and large, they're bound to do what their state voters decided. So, and then you get a certification of the results with the vice president presiding over the Senate in January, and then the president takes office on January 20th. Now, there's been lots of debate over the years about why we still have the Electoral College. It's really one of the last vestiges of the old federal system where the states still have a say. And a lot of people make the point, we've become nationalized with so many other things. Really, the states have lost pretty much all of their identity in most things. So why do we maintain this state identity in the electoral process? Why don't we just count the votes? It would be a heck of a lot easier to throw out the Electoral College and just count the votes. That is one scenario. That is one viewpoint. The other side will say, you know what? If you just count the votes, all the candidates are going to do is go to the most populated areas and campaign where they can get the most bang for their buck, which already happens, but it would definitely happen more if we ditched the Electoral College system. And if we also went to a popular vote system, we would lose the dynamic of the current presidential election through the Electoral College, where it really comes down to a certain number of states. We have 50 states. The vast majority of them are foregone conclusions. Democrats are going to win Massachusetts. They're going to win California. They're going to win Oregon. Republicans are going to win Texas. They're going to win Mississippi. They're going to win Arkansas. It's just a foregone conclusion for just about all the states. And so it really comes down to just a couple of battleground states where we have an electorate that's pretty evenly divided. And in recent years, it's always been the same states: Florida, Ohio, Virginia in recent years. These are the states that really the elections come down to, these so-called battleground states. Okay, so here we can see the results from the 2016 election. We can see some of these nuances from the Electoral College. So notice that the vast majority of states are red, and most of these states are routinely won by Republicans, especially those in the South. But if you look at the blue states won by Hillary Clinton, you'll notice that New England always firmly in the blue state camp and also the West Coast. But what made Trump gain the edge in 2016 is that he won several states that were traditional blue states, at least in the last generation or two, and most notably Wisconsin, Michigan. Have almost always been blue, have been turning red at the local and state level, and now in the most recent presidential election. Pennsylvania, too, also has been going more blue lately. And Trump was able to win those, including some other battleground states like Ohio and Florida. But if we look at these bottom lines here, we notice that Trump loses the popular vote by 2 points, over 2 million votes, but still wins in the Electoral College. And a lot of people will say, well, it should just be the popular vote, and Hillary Clinton should have won because if this is a democratic system, then they should just count the votes. But there's lots of problems with changing the Electoral College. It would take a constitutional amendment, which is really difficult to get these days. But it also would change the dynamic of campaigning and change how we hear the voices of Americans. And I'll show you on the next slide how some of those nuances play out. So we look at the map on the left. We see the American electoral map distorted for population. In other words, small states have been shrunk and states with larger population have been blown up. So you can see that even though Trump wins a lot of the states, and on the normal electoral college map, it's almost all red. But you can see when you blow up the population centers, it's basically equal, 50-50, even more lopsided for the Democrat. But then if you look at the county map, who won every county, you can see that America is even more red than just by looking at the Electoral College map by state. A couple of things that we notice here. On the left-hand map, we can see that in this election, the Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, has largely become a regional candidate. New England and the West Coast and a smattering of other states are going to be Democratic-leaning state. But if you look at the map on the right, you can see that space-wise or land-wise, the United States of America is a right-leaning red country. In the county map, you can see that we still have the same population centers. You can see even in California, Oregon, and Washington, for example, which are the bluest of blue states, you can see that only in certain areas. Picture where California is. You can see in the southern part of the state where LA County is. That's a big victory for the Democrat. The Bay Area also. But everything else is red. Look at Oregon. Vast majority of the state is red, except for the population centers, which is Portland. Same thing in Washington with Seattle. If you change the Electoral College and we made it simply on the popular vote, the map on the right by county says it all. If we just change to a simple count the votes system, basically who would choose the winner every single time we had an election? Los Angeles, San Francisco, Chicago, New York City. Basically the 10 biggest cities in the country would choose who the president would be. And likewise, because those are all safe havens for Democrats, the Democrats would obviously win a lot of elections if we just counted the popular vote. You can see the blue speckles all throughout those big oceans of red. Those are all major cities. So the big thing to take away here is that the Electoral College is in place for a specific reason. We didn't want certain pockets of people, aka big cities or regional areas, to make the decision for everybody. In reality, a lot of people thought the 2016 Electoral College system broke down, that it was backwards. Hillary should have won. Well, you could argue that it worked perfectly. The vast majority of America is red, except for all the high population centers. If you wanted a true popular vote, then you would be prepared as a rural person or a suburban person to have other locations choosing the president for you. And for that reason, that's why the framers of the Constitution did it the way that they did.